welcome to the August 2024 edition of the Cardinals Insider Podcast. My name is Brett McMillan. Glad to have you along with us as we get this thing going. It's our second to last episode here in this year. The summer is really flying by. Normally, Joe Pfeiffer and Larry State would be with me here on the program, both of them on assignment, and they had a really busy weekend last weekend as they staged a phenomenal reunion, as they always do, for the 20-year anniversary of the 2004 National League Championship team and the 1964 60-year reunion of beating the New York Yankees in the World Series. That is the one that we are going to focus on today as the Cardinals and the Yanks did battle. The Cardinals walked away with their 7th World Championship. Of course, Ken Boyer firing a famous blast at Yankee Stadium in a pivotal game. You'll hear more about that a little bit later. We have two gentlemen who are going to join us momentarily. I got the chance to interview them at a media availability during that 1964 World Series reunion. It is Charlie James, who is not maybe one of the better known members of that team or the 60s Cardinals, but he was a hometown kid. Webster Groves High School, Washington University here in St. Louis, played most of his career here with the Cardinals. And then the second guy maybe you have heard of, his name is Ray Washburn. Fired a no-hitter against the Giants in 1968, a couple years later, but also took the ball several times in 1964 as well. We're going to hear from both of those gentlemen, but we'll start with Mr. James. Again, as I mentioned, a local guy, an outfielder. He played 6 seasons here in St. Louis from 1960 to 1964 and really had a front row seat to something that all of us St. Louis kids would love to see, which is a Cardinals World Series. He owns a ring from it. Let's hear from Mr. Charlie James and his experience in the World Series and also playing for the 1964 Cardinals.
Be a St. Louis guy and to be a part of a team that won a World Series, what is the biggest thrill in that?
Well, I'd have to say that probably the biggest thrill of the 1964 baseball Cardinals winning the World Series wasn't winning the World Series. The biggest thrill was winning the National League pennant on the very last day of the season. And if you don't do that, you don't get to go to the World Series. So it took us a full year all the way down to the final game of the year to win it and be there.
There was an unbelievable amount of talent on that team. Who were the guys in the clubhouse that really brought the room together and got you guys moving together in the right direction?
It'd be hard to say. There were so many, like Kenny Boyer and Bob Gibson and Timmy McCarver and Kurt Flood and just a large number. But most everybody in that room had contributed in one way or another to get us to that last game of the regular season. They had to perform and cause the Cardinals to win some of the games earlier in the year, to get down to the last game of the year. So a lot of people were involved.
Tim McCarver in the National Hall of Fame as a broadcaster, the Cardinals Hall of Fame as a player. What made him special the way that he called a game behind the plate?
I think he just was so familiar with the pitchers that we had that year, and a lot of those guys had been with the Cardinals for several years. And he and Gibson, of course, were very good friends, and they had a lot of interesting events to talk about.
Talk to me about Bob Uecker, another guy. Speaking of interesting, what was he like as a teammate?
Bob Uecker was kind of the funny guy on the team, and he kept everybody loose. And he did a great job just keeping things under control and not letting anybody get too serious about the game, And he was a good guy to be a teammate with.
Interestingly, he seemed to get along well with Bob Gibson, who was like the opposite, was all serious all the time. What was their relationship like?
You mean Timmy McCarver and Gibson?
Uecker and Gibson.
Uecker and Gibson. I'd say they just basically got along great together, and it was one of those things where Timmy had proved himself as a very good catcher, And Euchre was a good catcher, I always thought. But with Timmy playing the way he was playing, they just had to go with him in the lineup, and Euchre accepted that.
And then last thing, it was Busch 1 by then, but most St. Louisans know it as Sportsman's Park. What was that ballpark like, the energy during a World Series game?
Oh gosh, it was magnificent. There was so much energy. It was hard to say, and as a player, you just would get so excited about each and every inning and game that you had a chance to play in, and it was a really big deal.
So there you have it, Charlie James, a St. Louis guy, and you heard him say it was a really big deal to play at Sportsman's Park, to play at what was Busch Stadium 1, as I referenced there in the clip. I'm glad we got to talk to Charlie. I think that he's the kind of guy that maybe we wouldn't have had on a program like this or in other platforms that we have Cardinals-wise in years past, just because when you walked into a room 5-10 years ago, you had Brock and Gibson and McCarver, and that's no disrespect, of course, to Mr. Charlie James, but those guys tended to get a lot of the attention, rightfully so, I would say. But a neat story, a guy that grew up in Webster Groves, played for his hometown team, and had that perspective with those legends that I just mentioned. Also, Bob Euchre, the reason I asked that question, might seem a little out of place, I suppose, because he was maybe more of a role player on that team at 40 appearances behind the dish in 1964, but he was just fun-loving. What you see in the Milwaukee Brewers radio booth now is what you used to see with him. He'd have that trombone going and would go out and play in the outfield during batting practice. So that's an opportunity for us to get some perspective on a true baseball legend like Bob Euchre, who really maybe has made his bones in fans' minds as a broadcaster, but had a playing career on some all-time great Cardinals teams. And so I wanted to make sure we captured that portion of history. Next up is going to be Ray Washburn. A couple of notes on him, a right-handed pitcher. He played 10 seasons in the major leagues, 9 of them here with the St. Louis Cardinals. He was part of all those 60s teams that you know of that won pennants, that won world championships. He was right there, was sharing a rotation with Bob Gibson and playing alongside the legends that I spoke about just a minute ago. 15 games for him, 15 appearances in 1964. You'll hear him mention toward the end of the interview he didn't really pitch in the World Series at all because he was dealing with a shoulder injury. His numbers probably weren't quite what he was looking for in 64 because of that injury, but still delivered some innings and was a quality arm. I'm going to start the interview, and you'll hear me explain in a second, but talking about 1968, because Gaylord Perry threw a no-hitter against the Cardinals out in San Francisco at Candlestick Park. There was, as the legend goes, celebration. The Giants were feeling good, and the next day, Ray Washburn comes back and does exactly the same to the San Francisco Giants in 1968. He's going to talk about the game that Gaylord threw, and he's also going to talk a little bit about his game, including 2 Hall of Famers that he faced at the end. So he's a little more, Mr. Washburn is a little more quietly spoken, so you may have to turn up, if you're listening just on audio, turn up that radio dial just a little bit to soak this in. But a guy that, again, not the number one name that you think of with Gibson and Brock and those types perhaps from the 1960s, but Ray Washburn was a central figure. He's a reason that those teams were successful, and it's our pleasure now to let you hear from him on the Cardinals Insider Podcast.
Talk about 1964. I actually want to talk about your no-hitter in 68. What do you remember about showing up to the ballpark that day?
There wasn't anything special. The night before, Gaylord was always a tough pitcher. Had tough outs against him. So he kept going on. Well, I know it's significant about both games. The infield grass at Candlestick, it's hard to drive a ball through, and there's only 2 balls hit out of the infield. So he had the sinker ball. It was called something else from time to time, but it got down to the last innings. We just couldn't generate a hit. So then the next day, the next afternoon, in fact, less than 24 hours, I'm warming up. I don't feel anything any different than any other time, but as the game progressed, they've kind of taken the same shape. When they hit a lot of ground balls, and the big part of the whole game came at the very end. The ninth inning, they had a little second baseman, got him out. The last two hitters of the game were guys called Mays and McCovey. So I got Willie Mays, hit a ground ball to third, and McCovey to pop a fly to center field, and that was the last out.
Pretty good last two to get sat down.
So there was a picture in the paper, all the next San Francisco paper, a couple of times. And Taylor then came over to our clubhouse and I had a picture together. And I was in uniform and he wasn't, of course.
Turning to 1964, you were right alongside Bob Gibson pitching that year. What set Bob apart in the way that he competed?
Well, I understand the question.
What was special about Bob Gibson?
Oh, he's competed and he was tough. He not only threw hard, but he was determined, and everything about him is on the mound. His ball had a lot of movement, other things to it. It wasn't just like you see today, cross seams up in the strike zone, which I don't understand at all about the philosophy of pitching today's game. But he moved the ball around and quick movement on it. And the secret of pitching to me is movement and location on every pitch. It's just one here, the next one here, and being able to throw that pitch, any one of those pitches at any point in the strike in the count. So if it's 1-1, 0-2, 2-0, it doesn't matter. You can be able to throw any pitch at any time.
The memorable moment, Ken Boyer at Yankee Stadium hits the home run. What do you remember it being like in person?
He just beat his brother.
What he's referencing there, that was the end of the interview. Great to chat with Ray Washburn. What he's referencing is that Ken Boyer, who is from a little town in southern Missouri, was playing third base for the Cardinals in 1964 in that World Series. His brother, Clete Boyer, was playing third base for the New York Yankees. So here you have these two rural Missouri kids that are meeting in the Fall Classic in 1964. And mind you, the World Series, of course, a huge deal today culturally, especially among Cardinal fans, especially in this part of the country, I would say. The World Series will always be special. But back in the 50s and 60s, there's the reason that they call that the golden age of the game. So really the eyes of America, the eyes of the sports world internationally in many ways were on that series with a team like the Yankees, steeped in tradition, and with the Cardinals, who were going for their 7th World Series at that point. That's a lot. And now, of course, 11 of them looking for number 12. But that's a lot of winning, a lot of tradition, a lot of eyes on it. And here you have these two kids from this unassuming town in southern Missouri. They're brothers and they're playing opposite each other. So really a neat story. I'm not aware of that happening any other time in World Series history. And even if there has been family on two sides, I can't imagine they were playing the same position. So Ken Boyer blasted a home run late in the game at Yankee Stadium in the middle games there. And then the series gets back to St. Louis. The Cardinals win it in 7. Some things that stood out to me from that interview with Ray Washburn. He said in 68, as he was warming up, he didn't really feel different. How often do we hear that when a pitcher goes out and spins a gem? I didn't really feel different. It just kind of came out and found its way onto the mound. And then the other thing I thought is when he was talking about Bob Gibson, he used that word determined, conviction for a pitcher. How important is that? Adam Wainwright used to talk about that all the time. If you don't have conviction in a pitch, if you don't feel like it's going to execute and do what you want, if you don't believe in it, don't throw it in that count. Don't throw it at all, because as a pitcher, you really can't afford to be letting a pitch out of your hand that you don't feel like is going to accomplish its purpose. So Bob Gibson, I'd never really heard it described that way, but I couldn't think of him being described any other way than a guy that pitched with determination, and I'm going to go ahead and translate that as well to conviction. This has been a whole lot of fun to be with you. The 1964 Cardinals, we're covering them on Cardinals Insider. We've had some content already this year. We'll have a profile of that team coming up here in a couple of weeks on the show. If you want to check out the television show hosted by Ozzie Smith, it's in its 9th season. It's Emmy nominated time after time. We're really proud of what the team puts together. We talk about the current roster. We talk about things like the 1964 season. We talk about the charitable endeavors and just fun, different things that maybe are baseball tangential or baseball adjacent. That's the word I'm looking for, but maybe aren't baseball itself. So this brand in the community has a really strong presence. There's a lot that goes on even outside of the white lines here with the St. Louis Cardinals. We would invite you to come every weekend during the season. Join Ozzie, check out the show, see what's going on. You can find a place to watch on TV at cardinals.com/insider, or you can watch on YouTube every single Sunday, 11 a.m. Central Time. The new episode drops. It's also online at cardinals.com/insider at the same time. We've got one more episode of this program here in the summer of 2024. That'll come your way on September the 1st. Also, you should check out world champion Kyle McClellan's great podcast, The Chatter's Box. He's had some great guests this year. I mean, I've really enjoyed it. His conversation with Lance Lynn, just amazing. Jason Isringhausen, that's who's out right now as I speak for his July guest that he dropped. He goes right around the 15th of each month. So those conversations with Lance and Izzy and everything else really that Kyle and company have done, I've just been a huge fan of that program. So if you like what we do here and you haven't heard the Chatter's Box, you do definitely need to check it out. For Joe Pfeiffer and Larry State, who are on assignment this week, my name is Brett McMillan, and we really do appreciate you. You can fire me a note, podcast with an S at cardinals.com is the email. Are there guests or topics you'd like us to cover? We really have a lot of free reign to do with this show. What we want, we appreciate your support. We'll check you out on September the 1st, 2024 for episode number 6 in this season of the Cardinals Insider Podcast. Until then, my name's Brett. We'll see you next time.